Carl Jung's Black Books, his dialogues with the shadow and the divine. When Steve Jobs once confessed that LSD had been one of the most important experiences of his life, he was echoing something Carl Jung had discovered half a century earlier without drugs, but through raw confrontation with his own mind. Winston Churchill spoke openly of his black dog of depression, a shadow that stalked him through power and war. Jung's Black Books, private journals never meant for publication, describe a similar plunge into the unknown. Between 1913 and 1916, Jung filled over 1,600 pages with visions, dialogues, and images that would later form the foundation of analytical psychology. He was 38 years old, a respected psychiatrist, close collaborator of Freud, yet suddenly he found himself collapsing into inner chaos. Numbers matter here. Those years produced almost 50 handwritten notebooks, a sheer mass of words and images that he guarded like dangerous fire. Why? Because they weren't theory, they were his lived disintegration. We often imagine genius as light, as clarity, but Jung's genius was born in darkness. In late 1913, he began to hear inner voices, and soon, terrifying visions seized him. He saw rivers of blood flooding Europe. This was before the First World War began in 1914. He questioned his sanity. Was he becoming schizophrenic? Or was his psyche showing him something real, a collective catastrophe brewing? His solution was radical. He did not suppress the visions. He recorded them meticulously. He drew them. He spoke to the figures that emerged. And this is where the reader of the Black Books feels an uncanny recognition. How many times have we silenced our inner voices because they felt too irrational, too threatening? Jung chose the opposite. He entered the abyss willingly. The Black Books reveal the first dialogues with what he would later call the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny. A figure appeared to him, sometimes as an old man, sometimes as a serpent, sometimes as a guide who told him truths he didn't want to hear. Jung wrote down the conversations word for word. He admitted that what came shocked him: cruelty, lust, ambition, despair. But he also found wisdom. This is the tension that runs through the pages. Are these demons or teachers? Jung concluded that they were both. The psyche is not polite. It throws at us the very content we repress. When Jung described talking to a character named Elijah or Salome, or even to the figure of Satan himself, he was dramatizing something deeply human, the inner theater we all carry. The Black Books were his stage. Why should this matter to us? Because modern psychology confirms what Jung intuited. Studies from the American Psychological Association show that suppression of unwanted thoughts leads to their rebound, often stronger than before. Numbers again. People who actively try not to think of something are 43% more likely to experience intrusive returns of that thought. Jung's confrontation, though terrifying, anticipated this by decades. Instead of resisting, he dialogued. Instead of labeling them mad, he asked them what they wanted. This method became active imagination, one of Jung's greatest contributions. Famous figures have admitted similar journeys. Tolstoy wrote in his Diary of Nights when he feared he would hang himself if he looked too long at the rope. Nietzsche descended into visions that birthed Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Jung, however, did something different. He systematized his descent. He turned chaos into material. The Black Books show him writing late into the night, sketching mandalas, painting figures that seemed half myth, half nightmare. He confessed later, "Everything else is to be derived from this. It began at that time and the later details hardly matter anymore." In other words, his entire life's work, Archetypes, the collective unconscious, the individuation process, was seeded in those dark years. There is tension here for us. When we feel anxiety, depression, or intrusive thoughts, we ask, am I breaking down? Or am I being shown something essential? The Black Books refuse a simple answer. They insist that both can be true. Jung nearly broke. He feared madness daily, but he also mined gold from the depths. We see this paradox clearly in one entry where he writes, "My soul spoke to me saying, 'Return to the desert to your poverty.' I resisted, but she was stronger." What is this if not the universal experience of resistance to change followed by surrender? The lesson is uncomfortable, but liberating. Pain is not always pathology. Sometimes it is initiation. Jung did not know this at first. He trembled, he doubted, but he kept going. That is why his testimony is invaluable, because he lived what many of us feel in fragments. The abyss that threatens to swallow us is also the place where we meet ourselves. And the numbers remind us, between 1913 and 1916, millions in Europe drowned in literal blood, while Jung drowned in symbolic blood on his pages. Both were real, both were history. His private apocalypse mirrored the collective one. When we read the Black Books, we are not entering a dusty archive. We are standing beside a man who risked his sanity so that generations after him could learn that the shadow, though terrifying, is not the end. It is the beginning. When we think of sacred books, we imagine scriptures, texts meant to enlighten. The irony of Jung's Black Books is that they were never written for us. They were private, intimate, raw. For decades, even scholars of Jung doubted their existence until they were finally published in 2020. 7 leather-bound volumes filled with black covers, hence the name, containing over 1,600 handwritten pages. Jung himself had locked them away, calling them the nucleus of my later works. Without them, there would be no Red Book, no archetypes and the collective unconscious, no psychology and alchemy. The Black Books are the laboratory notes of a man experimenting on his own soul. The context matters. In 1913, Jung had just broken with Freud, who had once seen him as his heir. Their friendship had been intellectual fire, but also a battlefield. Freud reduced the psyche to repressed sexuality, while Jung insisted there were deeper, mythic currents at play. When their split came, Jung was left isolated. Imagine being at the peak of your career, president of the International Psychoanalytic Association, respected across Europe, and suddenly you are alone. That loneliness is inscribed into the very first pages of the Black Books. He writes of being abandoned by the spirit of the times and compelled instead to listen to the spirit of the depths. It was not a metaphor. He meant it literally. What did that look like? Every night after his family went to sleep, Jung sat in his study. He closed his eyes and allowed images to rise. He would then write them down word for word in careful Gothic script. Sometimes he sketched figures in the margins. Sometimes he painted later in the Red Book. But the Black Books are not polished art. They are raw encounters. Jung meets Elijah, the prophet. He meets Salome, a blind maiden who becomes his soul guide. He meets Philemon, an old man with kingfisher wings who becomes his inner teacher. These figures speak in full dialogues, answering Jung's questions, mocking his pride, urging him to confront his own darkness. The tone is strikingly biblical. The entries read less like diary notes and more like scripture being dictated. It is here that the concept of active imagination was born. Jung would later describe it clinically, a conscious dialogue with figures of the unconscious. But in the Black Books, we see the dangerous beginnings. Jung did not know if he was insane. He worried constantly that he was on the brink of psychosis. He wrote in one entry, my soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I am speaking, I call you. Are you there?" This desperate invocation is familiar to anyone who has felt cut off from themselves, anyone who has stared at the ceiling at night and begged for meaning. The Black Books show how that invocation was answered. Jung's soul replied, not in abstractions, but in voices, visions, myths unfolding like theater. And what is more astonishing is how accurate these inner experiences became when compared with outer events. In 1913, he saw rivers of blood, as if Europe itself were tearing open. In 1914, World War I erupted. He later said, "It was as if I had been seized by a spirit. It was not I who made the visions. They came." In this sense, the Black Books are prophetic, not in the supernatural sense, but in the psychological sense. They reveal how the unconscious is not sealed off from history. It is intertwined with it. What lessons can we take from this birth of the Black Books? One is that solitude is not always empty. Jung's solitude, painful as it was, birthed a dialogue that sustained him for the rest of his life. Another is that the voices inside us, the images we dismiss as fantasies, can sometimes contain wisdom. Today, cognitive psychology estimates that nearly 47% of our waking hours are spent in mind-wandering. We dismiss it as distraction. Jung treated it as revelation. The difference is discipline. He returned every night, pen in hand, ready to confront whatever emerged. And there is a third lesson, perhaps the most personal. Jung's figures were not always kind. They accused him. They stripped him of pride. One told him, "You must kill your heroes." Another told him, "You are too clever, and therefore you have no heart." Imagine hearing that from your own unconscious. Yet Jung wrote it down, accepted it, wrestled with it. The Black Books are therefore not journals of comfort, but of confrontation. They ask us, do we dare hear what our inner depths have to say, even if it ruins our self-image? Without these journals, Jung himself might not have survived. He later admitted that the visions nearly destroyed him, but recording them gave them form. Form meant survival. Form meant transformation. That is why the Black Books matter. They show us that when we descend into the abyss, the act of writing, of giving shape to chaos, can be a lifeline. We may never write our own Black Books, but in a sense, each of us carries them. They are the unsaid thoughts, the dreams we dismiss, the moments when we feel our soul speaking and we turn away. Jung did not turn away. That decision birthed one of the most important psychological journeys of the 20th century. When we hear the word shadow, we often think of something sinister, something to hide. But Carl Jung gave this word a deeper meaning. The shadow is everything within us that we refuse to acknowledge. Desires we consider unacceptable, rage we bury, envy we disguise as indifference, fears we cover with bravado. In the Black Books, this shadow does not remain abstract. It comes alive, it speaks, it argues. Jung does not simply describe his darkness, he sits across from it, face to face, and records the conversation. To understand the weight of this, we need to remember the time. Between 1913 and 1916, Jung felt split between two worlds. By day, he treated patients, a respectable psychiatrist in Zurich. By night, he descended into visions where the shadow appeared in terrifying forms. One of the earliest figures was a serpent, hissing with contempt, challenging his morality. Another time, he encountered a dark, powerful man who told him, "You must accept me, or I will destroy you." Jung realized quickly that he could not escape. He had to listen. This method, dialoguing with the shadow, was revolutionary. At the time, psychiatry pathologized such experiences. Voices were symptoms of schizophrenia. Hallucinations were to be medicated or ignored. Jung dared to ask, what if they are messages? The Black Books show him testing this hypothesis line by line. He writes down his questions, then the answers that arise, often shocking in their bluntness. In one entry, he asks why he must suffer these visions. The voice replies, "Because you are too far from life, you live in your head. You must descend into your own depths." We might think this was only Jung's personal torment, but here is where the Black Books pull us in. Who among us has not heard that inner critic, that harsh whisper that says, "You are not enough, you are pretending, you are weak"? Psychologists today confirm the universality of this. Research from Daniel Wegner on thought suppression shows that people who try hardest to avoid negative self-judgments experience them with greater intensity. In other words, the more we fight the shadow, the stronger it grows. Jung stumbled into this truth a century ago, not in a lab, but in his own soul. Famous voices echo this recognition. Martin Luther King Jr. once admitted that he fought with profound doubts and fear of failure every night before bed. Ernest Hemingway wrote in letters that the worst enemy is always the enemy inside your own skin. Even modern neuroscience backs it. Studies on the amygdala reveal that suppressed emotions continue to activate brain circuits, sometimes more intensely than expressed ones. Numbers matter here. One study in psychological science found that people who openly acknowledged anger reduced their physiological stress markers by 45% compared to those who repressed it. Jung's nightly dialogues anticipated this data. He proved it by survival. The Black Books show the shadow's dual role, destroyer and teacher. At times, the figures he met threatened him, called him arrogant, accused him of lacking heart. At other times, they offered wisdom that he could never have found through logic. One vision recounts a black-clad figure telling him, "To find the light, you must love your darkness." Such paradox is at the core of Jung's psychology. He came to see that the shadow is not evil in itself. It is energy, raw, untamed, potentially creative if integrated. We see the consequences when it is not integrated. The 20th century, Jung argued, was a theater of shadow projections. Nations projected their denied impulses onto others, leading to war. He wrote in 1939, "The world hangs by a thread, and that thread is the psyche of man." He knew it because he had witnessed it in himself. His private shadow work in the Black Books mirrored the collective descent into war. What does this mean for us? It means that our own shadow work is not a luxury. It is survival. Ignored, the shadow leaks out in relationships, in sudden rage, in envy disguised as critique. Faced, it can transform. Jung demonstrated how, not by repression, not by indulgence, but by dialogue. He wrote, he listened, he argued, he let the voice speak until it revealed something beyond cruelty, truth. And here lies the challenge. The shadow never flatters. It tells us we are hypocrites, cowards, liars. Reading the Black Books, we see Jung humbled again and again. He admits, "I trembled before the power of my own thoughts." He confesses to feeling weak, ridiculous, even terrified. But by recording it, he created a map for us. A map that says, you are not alone if you hear such voices. You are not broken. You are being invited to a conversation. The paradox is clear. The more Jung listened to the shadow, the less it controlled him. By giving it form on the page, he transformed possession into dialogue, chaos into meaning. That is why the Black Books are not just Jung's personal descent. They are instructions for any soul willing to face its own abyss. The Black Books are often remembered for Jung's confrontation with the shadow, but if we stop there, we miss half the story. Because alongside the darkness came visions of overwhelming light, symbols so powerful they shook Jung's understanding of reality itself. These were not metaphors for him. They were encounters, intense, undeniable, and sacred. To Jung, the figures who appeared in his inner world were not fantasies but realities of the psyche. And the more he wrote, the more he realized they were not just his. They belonged to something universal. Consider the figure of Philemon, one of the most striking presences in the Black Books. Philemon appeared as an old man with the wings of a kingfisher, radiating wisdom that Jung felt came from beyond his conscious mind. He spoke like a prophet, correcting Jung when he strayed into pride or arrogance. You must differentiate between what comes from you and what comes from beyond you, Philemon warned. Jung later said that Philemon represented a force that he could never have invented, a living archetype of wisdom. He even claimed that Philemon taught him what he later called the collective unconscious, the idea that within each of us lives a deep layer of shared symbols, myths, and patterns, older than any single individual. This is where the Black Books move from personal diary to something close to scripture. Jung conversed with biblical figures like Elijah and Salome. He encountered serpents, gods, and cosmic beings. One vision described the descent into a cave where he met the figure of Christ, not as a theological dogma but as a living presence within his psyche. Another time, he saw a temple rising from the depths, its walls covered with unfamiliar symbols. What are we to make of this? Skeptics might dismiss it as hallucination, but Jung insisted that these images carried meaning, and history seems to confirm him. He dreamed of rivers of blood in 1913. A year later, the First World War erupted. He dreamed of a dead god and the rebirth of new symbols. By the 1930s, Europe was in spiritual crisis, searching for meaning in destructive ideologies. Numbers give weight to this. Across cultures, anthropologists have catalogued thousands of recurring mythic motifs: heroes descending to the underworld, gods sacrificing themselves, serpents guarding hidden treasure. Joseph Campbell, inspired by Jung, mapped these into the hero's journey. Neuropsychology even shows that our brains are wired for pattern and narrative. Studies on dream imagery reveal cross-cultural similarities in archetypal content. Jung, in the solitude of his Black Books, stumbled onto the same truth. What arises in the depths of one psyche can mirror the collective story of humanity. It is striking how the divine in Jung's visions was never comforting in a simplistic way. It was demanding, even terrifying. He wrote of a God who told him, "You are not to worship me, but to understand me." Imagine the shock of hearing such words in the quiet of your study. Jung realized that the divine was not external authority, but inner confrontation. He saw the gods as symbols of forces within the human soul, forces that, if ignored, drive us blindly, but if recognized, can transform us. We might ask, what is the difference between madness and revelation? Jung wrestled with this every night. He admitted he feared psychosis, feared losing his grip on reality, but what grounded him was the act of writing, of shaping the visions into dialogue. By doing so, he found meaning. This is crucial. Modern psychology confirms that meaning-making is one of the strongest predictors of resilience. Viktor Frankl, survivor of the Holocaust, echoed Jung's insight decades later. Those who have a why to live can bear almost anyhow. Jung's Black Books show him constructing his why through direct confrontation with both shadow and divine. There is also a personal lesson here. Most of us dismiss our dreams, our fleeting visions, the sudden images that appear in meditation or crisis. Jung teaches us to treat them as messages, not noise. He took his inner life so seriously that he devoted years to recording it. The divine he met was not distant, not abstract. It was alive in symbols, in dialogues, in living archetypes. The tension is what captivates us. The shadow accused him, tore him down, humiliated him. The divine uplifted him, showed him wholeness, hinted at a unity that included both darkness and light. The Black Books refuse the easy split of good versus evil. They show instead that the psyche is a theater, where gods and demons, saints and serpents all play their roles. Jung's courage was to let them speak and to learn from them. In the end, these encounters with the divine shaped his entire psychology. Archetypes, individuation, the collective unconscious, these were not abstract theories born in a study. They were crystallized experiences from those nights with the Black Books. When Jung later said, "Religion is a defense against a direct experience of God," he spoke from this lived truth. He had met that experience raw and unmediated in ink and vision, and he left us the record. What happens when the mind breaks open? For most of us, the idea is terrifying. We fear collapse, we fear losing control. Jung feared it too. During the years of the Black Books, he wrote repeatedly that he was on the edge of psychosis. Yet out of that chaos came not only survival but transformation. This paradox, destruction becoming creation, is at the heart of the fifth movement in his descent. If the earlier parts of the Black Books show us confrontation with shadow and encounters with the divine, this part reveals what those forces did to him. They burned him, but they also forged him. It is worth remembering the scale of this fire. Jung wrote almost daily between 1913 and 1916, producing thousands of pages of visions, conversations, and images. He described rivers of blood, temples collapsing, serpents rising, gods demanding sacrifice. He did not soften the language. He did not rationalize it. He let it be raw, violent, overwhelming. The chaos of the psyche was as vivid to him as the chaos of Europe exploding into war. And here lies a striking fact. Jung's visions often preceded reality. He saw images of catastrophe before the First World War began. He recorded them faithfully, and then history confirmed them. For Jung, this was proof that inner chaos and outer chaos were not separate. They mirrored one another. But how did this not destroy him? Many of his contemporaries did collapse. Friedrich Nietzsche, consumed by visions of gods and destiny, ended in madness. Antonin Artaud, the French poet who also wrestled with archetypal images, was institutionalized for years. Jung escaped that fate not because his visions were lighter, but because he developed a method to work with them. He called it active imagination, and the Black Books are its first laboratory. Instead of being swallowed by images, he dialogued with them. Instead of repressing or indulging, he created a middle path, conversation. This act transformed chaos into something he could survive. We can see the principle in modern psychology. Trauma research shows that narrating an overwhelming event, putting it into words, reduces its power. James Pennebaker's studies on expressive writing reveal that patients who wrote about their deepest struggles improved immune function by measurable percentages, sometimes up to 50% reduction in doctor visits compared to control groups. Jung, without data, embodied this truth. By writing the Black Books, He gave structure to fire. The flames no longer consumed him, they illuminated him. The transformation was not only psychological, but creative. Out of this raw material came his later theories: archetypes, individuation, synchronicity. He did not invent them in abstraction, he experienced them in chaos. The archetypes were the figures that spoke to him. Individuation was the process he underwent, being torn apart and rebuilt. Synchronicity was the eerie mirroring of inner vision and outer history. All of it was seeded in fire. The Black Books show us moments of despair so deep that Jung admits he wished for death. He wrote of wandering deserts, of facing serpents that threatened to crush him, of gods who told him he must sacrifice his pride, his certainty, even his sanity. And yet always there was a return. Always he emerged with something new, a phrase, a symbol, a figure like Philemon who became his guide. This cycle of descent and return is not unique to Jung. It is the archetypal pattern of transformation found in myths across cultures. Prometheus stealing fire, Christ descending into hell, the hero entering the underworld and returning with treasure. Jung lived this myth personally, in real time, night after night, with pen and ink as his lifeline. Why does this matter to us? Because we too face inner chaos. Maybe not in visions as dramatic as Jung's, but in panic attacks, in nights of insomnia, in grief that feels unbearable, in anger that shakes us. The instinct is to avoid, to suppress, to numb. Jung shows another way. Chaos can become power when given form. The fire that threatens to burn us can become the forge that shapes us. His example is radical because it refuses both denial and collapse. He did not say ignore the darkness, he did not say surrender to madness. He said engage it, speak with it, write it, let it shape you. Modern neuroscience supports this. Neuroplasticity research shows that the brain rewires through repeated engagement with experience. Confronted consciously, chaos rewires us into resilience. Avoided, it festers. Numbers again. Studies on post-traumatic growth show that nearly 70% of survivors of severe trauma report some form of personal growth, new appreciation for life, deeper relationships, stronger values. Pain alone does not cause growth. Pain processed, engaged, and integrated does. That is precisely what Jung did in the Black Books. We often imagine creativity as inspiration, a sudden light. But Jung's creativity was fire. He let the flames consume the old structures of his psyche, and from the ashes he built something new. The Black Books are proof that what looks like madness can, if worked with, become meaning. And this is their gift to us, to remind us that inner chaos is not the end of the story. It can be the beginning of transformation if we dare to face it. When the Black Books were first revealed to the public in 2020, many readers were stunned. They expected to find coherent philosophy, a roadmap written by a master. Instead, they found madness, visions of serpents, gods, dead men speaking, deserts burning, and Jung arguing with voices that told him he was arrogant, weak, and blind. On the surface, it looks like the descent of a man losing his mind. And yet, hidden inside the chaos, there is wisdom. Sharp, transformative, unforgettable. The paradox is this: Jung's madness became his greatest teacher. Let us remember, Jung himself feared insanity. He admitted in letters that he lived every day between 1913 and 1916 with the terror of collapse. "I was menaced by a psychosis," he confessed later, "and it was only by the narrowest margin that I escaped." But instead of resisting or running, he leaned into it. He let the voices speak, he let the images unfold, and he wrote them down faithfully. This decision is why we can speak of lessons today rather than a tragedy. Because in engaging the madness, he discovered wisdom that could not be reached otherwise. One lesson is the importance of dialogue. Jung's figures were not silent images, they were conversational partners. Philemon, Elijah, Salome, even Satan, all spoke, argued, questioned. Jung did not treat them as hallucinations to be dismissed, but as teachers. In one entry, his soul tells him, "You are too clever, you must become simple. You must accept not knowing." This is not advice from textbooks. It is brutal honesty, spoken from the depths of his own psyche. How often do we silence such truths in ourselves because they hurt? Jung listened, and by listening he grew. Modern psychology has confirmed the power of such inner dialogues. Studies on internal family systems therapy, for instance, show that treating inner voices as parts, rather than pathologies, helps patients integrate trauma. Numbers matter. Clinical trials reveal that patients using such dialogical methods show significant reductions in PTSD symptoms compared to traditional suppression strategies. Jung pioneered this alone in his study, a century before the data existed. The wisdom in his madness was practical. Speak with your voices, do not exile them. Another lesson is the embrace of paradox. The figures in the Black Books constantly contradicted themselves. One moment they urged Jung to humility, the next they praised his power. One told him to seek solitude, another commanded him to enter life fully. At first, Jung was frustrated. He wanted clarity, one straight answer. But the more he listened, the more he realized that life itself is paradox. Wisdom is not in choosing one side, but in holding both. The soul, he wrote, demands both darkness and light. For a culture addicted to certainty, this is revolutionary. The Black Books also reveal the danger of repression. When Jung resisted his visions, they became violent. When he accepted them, they softened into meaning. This aligns with what modern neuroscientists like Daniel Siegel emphasize. Integration, not suppression, creates mental health. Repressing pain fragments the psyche. Integrating it creates coherence. Jung lived this with ink and paper. His madness turned into wisdom because he allowed even the most terrifying figures to speak until their message became clear. Famous voices have echoed this path. Vincent van Gogh, often dismissed as mad, wrote that his visions of light in wheat fields were more real to him than the ordinary daylight. Friedrich Hölderlin, the German poet, claimed that madness is the beginning of all poetry. Jung stands alongside them, but with a difference. He systematized it. He transformed private delirium into public knowledge. His Black Books became the foundation of archetypal psychology, dream analysis, the concept of individuation. Without the madness, there would be no wisdom. For us, the lesson is piercing. We all carry fragments of madness, moments of overwhelming emotion, irrational fears, intrusive thoughts. We often treat them as signs of weakness. Jung shows another possibility, that inside the madness may lie wisdom, if we engage it. The inner critic might be brutal, but beneath its cruelty may be a demand for honesty. The terrifying dream may hide a truth we are refusing in daylight. The sense of collapse may be the psyche's way of burning away illusions. The tension cannot be avoided. Jung trembled every night, unsure if he was discovering truths or falling into psychosis. But his courage was to keep writing, to keep listening, to keep turning chaos into words. And through that, he discovered wisdom that still speaks to us, that the line between madness and meaning is not fixed. It is drawn by how we respond. Resist, and the voices destroy. Engage, and they teach. The Black Books, then, are not evidence of Jung's insanity. They are evidence of his courage. He walked the thin line where most of us would flee, and he returned with lessons that continue to shape psychology, spirituality, and philosophy. The wisdom of madness is this: what feels like destruction may be the first step to transformation if we dare to let it speak. When we close the Black Books, the temptation is to breathe in relief and say, this was Jung's private torment, not ours. But the truth is harder and far more relevant. The voices Jung recorded between 1913 and 1932, the 7 black leather journals filled with more than 1,600 handwritten pages, are not only his story, they are a mirror. They reveal something about us, about the way the human psyche works, about the challenges we all face when life collapses into crisis, and they leave us with lessons we cannot ignore. Think of the numbers. Jung spent nearly 2 decades shaping these encounters, first in the Black Books, then refining them into the Red Book. During this time, Europe was bleeding, 20 million dead in World War I, followed by global economic collapse, then the rise of fascism and another world war. Jung's visions of blood and fire were not just personal nightmares, they foreshadowed a century of destruction. That is why his work matters to us today. It insists that the inner world and the outer world are bound together. Ignore one and the other erupts in chaos. So what do the Black Books teach us? First, they teach us that darkness is not the enemy. Jung's shadow was brutal, accusing him of pride, cruelty, and weakness. Yet every time he engaged it, he found new truth. Modern psychology confirms this. Suppressed emotions return stronger, while acknowledged ones lose their destructive grip. Studies in emotional regulation show up to a 40% reduction in stress when people name their feelings instead of repressing them. Jung's nightly dialogues anticipated this science. He proved that facing darkness directly can transform it into wisdom. Second, they teach us that symbols are alive. Jung's encounters with Philemon, Salome, Elijah, and even Satan were not simply hallucinations. They were archetypal forces, patterns that shape us all. We see them in myths, in religion, in literature. Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, which inspired Star Wars and countless modern stories, is rooted in Jung's discoveries. Today, neuroscientists find that the brain responds to mythic images as if they are real, lighting up regions associated with memory, emotion, and decision-making. The Black Books remind us symbols are not decoration, they are guides. Third, they teach us resilience through meaning. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, later wrote, "Suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds a meaning." Jung lived this decades earlier. His suffering did not disappear, it burned him night after night. But because he gave it form, because he shaped it into dialogue and vision, it transformed into the foundation of analytical psychology. The Black Books show us that meaning-making is not luxury, it is survival. There is also a warning. Jung insisted that what he found in himself was mirrored in society. The shadow denied by individuals becomes the shadow projected by nations. In his time, this projection fueled war, genocide, and totalitarianism. In our time, we see it in polarization, hatred, and the dehumanization of others. The lesson is direct. If we do not face our inner darkness, we will meet it outside, magnified and violent. And yet, the final lesson is hope. For all their terror, the Black Books are not hopeless. They end with images of rebirth, of renewal, of integration. Jung emerges not destroyed, but deepened. He later wrote, "I had to accept that what I had experienced was reality. It was the most important time of my life. Everything else is derived from it." This is the ultimate teaching. The abyss we fear may be the very place where our true life begins. We may never sit in a study, pen in hand, conversing with prophets and serpents, but we all know what it means to feel broken, to face nights of despair, to hear inner voices of criticism or fear. Jung's testimony shows that these moments do not have to end in collapse. They can be beginnings. They can be the fire that transforms us. The Black Books, in their raw honesty, strip away illusions and invite us to see our own shadows, our own symbols, our own potential for light. And this is why, over a century later, Jung's private journals speak so loudly. They remind us that wisdom is born in confrontation, that creativity is forged in fire, and that the path from darkness to light is not linear, but spiraled, full of paradox and pain. The Black Books are not comfortable reading. They are dangerous, alive, and demanding. But if we dare to listen, they teach us what Jung learned in his darkest hours, that the human soul is vast, that it holds both demons and gods, and that by engaging both we can emerge not broken but whole.